Reframe number 6, Errors in Cognition, Part 2. This video is Part 2 of our series about errors in cognition. Part 1 is about the cognitive errors that flow from defects in memory and recall. A link to that video can be found in the show notes, in the card in the upper right of your screen, and at the end of this video. Part 2 is about the errors in thinking that result from only being able to think of one thing at a time. The nature of our consciousness makes the splitting of our attention very difficult. Thus, we are strongly influenced by whatever stimulus, perception, thought or feeling that happens to be filling our attention at the moment, with its conditioned responses and associations, rather than other considerations and goals which are not occurring. And they are not occurring because they are pushed out of the way by the strength of the immediate stimulus. And the limits of our focused attention, functioning within the bounds of short-term memory. Edward De Bono conceptualized this limitation of consciousness as the area of activation, and Carlos Castaneda called it the assemblage point. Imagine a circle which can only contain one object at a time. Outside competitive forces with different agendas are trying to forcibly fill the circle. Whoever is strongest at any given time can jam his content through and fill the space. It's sort of like playing King of the Mountain. When something gets pushed in, what was there before gets pushed out. Another analogy can be found within the sport of sumo wrestling, a form of competitive full contact wrestling in Japan, where a rikishi, the Japanese word for wrestler, attempts to force his opponent out of a circular ring. What determines what content is occupying the circle? Emotions have a lot of strength, as do sensations like pain, hunger, fatigue, and physiological state. Past experience, conditioning, and associations also play a role. Your own volition can also place content, but most of the time, we are just passive and weak spectators who unconsciously identify with and assent to whatever is put there by outside mechanical forces. As a rule, we do not question or challenge this content. Rather, we totally take it for granted as being perfectly valid and appropriate to the situation at hand. It is a tremendous mental effort to try to fill the space with your own volitional content and displace involuntary, spontaneous content that wants to strongly occupy the space. For example, if you are feeling an acute or chronic pain, extreme fatigue, or severe emotional distress, the default tendency is to yield to a passive contemplation of the sensation, along with the thoughts and feelings that accompany it. To direct one's attention upon anything else at that moment, such as a candle flame, a memory, a scent, a sound, a visualization, a prayer, your breathing, or concentrating on performing complex movement, is a mental effort akin to bench pressing 200 pounds. It's like confronting a ginormous sumo wrestler in the middle of a small circle, and you have to push him out, and he does not want to go. This is what it means to have inner strength. Inner strength is the ability to direct attention in the face of resistance. Why this? Why did our thinking and consciousness develop this way? Such cognitive behavior may have conferred a survival advantage in our evolutionary past, when life and death decisions had to be made in an instant. What if a lion is charging at you, or say a spear has been thrown in your direction? There is no time to carefully consider alternative courses of action, analyze their pros and cons, and weigh long and short-term consequences of each. Instinct, conditioning, emotion, what was happening before and what is happening now, all constitute the ingredients of an algorithm that makes just one clear and coherent idea or impulse occur to us at that critical moment. Something like fight or flight, or stay still and hide or play dead. In this context, he who hesitates is lost and just possibly eaten. The need to mount a quick response to threats is akin to the Fast System 1 model described in Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. The Fast System evolved to make instant judgments in potentially dangerous situations that we encountered as hunter-gatherers in prehistoric settings. It works by pattern recognition and conditioned or reflexive response. There is no deep thinking involved, because usually there is and was no time for it. Imagine an enemy hurling a spear at you, a cave bear charging, or a poisonous insect landing on your face. Pressures such as these shape this system of thinking. But because the fast system is fast, and therefore effective in many situations, this fast system is often based on scant information and can be inappropriate or wrong, because there is and was no time to consider a better choice. Kahneman also describes a second system that can be engaged, which he termed the slow system, or system 2. It can be used when there is time to engage it, but it is very energy intensive and takes a lot of effort. So many are inclined to give it a pass in favor of the fast system, which basically is effortless and runs on automatic pilot. In its raw form, the slow system does not even come close to realizing its full potential. With training and education in logic, statistics, math, history, science, psychology, etc., the slow system can be incredibly effective and productive. The modern world, with all its technology and advancements, was built by the slow system. Of the two systems, the fast system 1 is the line of least resistance in terms of mental effort. It is the low-hanging fruit. The slow system 2 requires greater effort, but with potentially greater rewards, time permitting. Intellectual arrogance and egocentric bias is the legacy today of our evolutionary past. When stressed or otherwise under pressure, we are primed and inclined to engage in flight or fight thinking with no deliberative examinations of alternatives, pros and cons, and consequences. Because we are competitive social primates, survival dictates that we secure a desirable place in the social hierarchy. Hence, many of us are opinionated and argumentative in asserting our opinions, seeking to dominate criticize, condemn, and even browbeat verbally those unfortunate enough to interact with us. It is no longer socially acceptable, and it is even illegal to attack someone physically. But we can do it verbally with impunity and get away with it most of the time. We have all met individuals who seldom, if ever, will admit to being wrong, for fear of appearing weak, uncertain, or even stupid. Such individuals fear a loss in social position and status, with all that such a loss would entail: loss of money, rejection by the base or electorate if you are a politician, and even romantic rejection, to name a few possible consequences. Antecedents can be found in the social behavior and interactions of baboons and chimps, where troop members with lower status are less likely to be groomed by other members of the troop, and even may be shunned or become the objects of aggression. This evolutionary legacy leads to a plethora of cognitive mistakes and biases. For example, our thinking may be so dominated by a single idea that potential consequences, as well as other related details and factors, do not occur at that moment, or are minimized in importance. In this context, we are reminded of the famous words of David Glasgow Farragut, 1801 to 1870, a U.S. naval officer during the Civil War who refused to consider retreat during the Battle of Mobile Bay. At a critical moment in that battle, he uttered an approximation of the now famous phrase, "Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead." His words aptly apply to the following three examples. Example 1. We are too often tempted by the sight and smell of a tempting dessert and push aside any thought of the havoc such indulgences will wreak upon our blood sugar, insulin levels, and weight. Example number 2. We are seduced by an attractive stranger and disregard the risk for venereal disease or pregnancy posed by such an encounter. Example number 3. In considering the pros and cons of buying a new piece of gear, only the pros are considered and not the cons. The cons just don't occur at that critical moment of decision or action, either through ignorance of relevant information or emotional bias via minimization of cons or consequences. So at the moment of truth, when we commit to an irrevocable purchase or decision, considerations such as the following may not occur. 1. We have a history of buying gear that rarely gets used. 2. We can't afford another monthly payment. 3. Our job is precarious, potentially compromising our ability to make any future monthly payments at all. 4. We may not be able to use this piece of gear often enough to justify its expense. 5. The weight of this piece of gear may hurt our back, shoulder, and arm and pose a real ergonomic threat. 6. A new improved model is coming out in 3 months. Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead, and hope for the best. Creative thinking guru Edward De Bono suggests that we can compensate for the limits imposed by the nature of our cognition by invoking various ready-made acronyms and/or visual symbols at relevant moments when we are making an important decision or choice. Consider the brilliant irony in his idea. He is suggesting the use of the very pattern recognition stimulus response reflex that characterizes System 1 thinking against itself. He educates us to recognize certain patterns in our thinking, feeling, and actions, and gives tools in the form of symbolic acronyms to help us interrupt the mechanical flow of interpretation that would normally ensue. By becoming familiar with these acronyms, in advance, we are equipped with a set of instruments to counter the mechanical and reflexive thinking in which we normally engage, and thereby potentially avoid the cognitive errors inherent to System 1 type thinking. This is like using the enemy's own strengths against himself. This is using System 1's characteristic pattern response behavior to overcome the limits imposed by one thought at a time domination. We can learn to recognize our own patterns of defective thinking and then reflexively invoke a tool crafted to produce a more creative and beneficial response. Let's briefly discuss a few of De Bono's tools to illustrate their practical value. Number 1, C&S. It stands for consequences and sequel. We all know what consequences are, but what about sequel? According to Oxford Languages, sequel means something that takes place after or as a result of an earlier event. An example of the use of the word sequel is, this encouragement to grow potatoes had a disastrous sequel some 50 years later. Thus, the acronym C&S reminds us to not rush blindly forward, but rather to stop and consider what might flow from any contemplated action, both immediately and in the longer term. In the previously given example, where we too often succumb to a tempting dessert, we would pause to brainstorm and list possible short, medium, and long-term consequences, such as getting fat, spiking your blood sugar and insulin, with all the damage that causes, appearing to others as weak and self-indulgent, feeling worse afterward from overeating and ODing on sugar, breaking your diet, and having to make up for it by starving yourself later, tooth decay, self-disappointment from lack of self-control, etc. C&S has the potential to stop the world and interrupt the high probability response that would normally follow exposure to such a stimulus. Normally, we would not remember to do this, or at least not at the time it is happening. Doing a C&S prompts us to remember. Number 2, PMI. PMI stands for plus, minus, and interesting. Doing a PMI on an idea means to brainstorm and list the good things about it, the bad things, and the things that are neither good nor bad, but are interesting. In the previously given example, where we were seduced by an attractive stranger, the good things are sexual pleasure. The bad things are possible AIDS, venereal warts, herpes. And the interesting things are it could develop into a long-term relationship, or it could be a fatal attraction. Number 3, CAF. CAF stands for consider all factors. Doing a CAF on an idea means to brainstorm and list all the possible factors that might relate to the idea. In the example 3, previously given, where we are thinking about buying a new piece of gear from a local store, various factors were listed that might affect the contemplated purchase. Let's review them again in a modified form and in the context of doing a CAF. Number 1, Costco is selling the same item for less, and the item is returnable if we buy it from Costco. Number 2, we can't afford another monthly payment. Number 3, our health is precarious, potentially compromising our ability to make any future monthly payments. 4, we may not be able to use this piece of gear often enough to justify its expense. Number 5, the weight of this piece of gear may hurt our back, our shoulders, our arm, and pose a real ergonomic threat. 6, A new improved model may be coming out sometime in the next year. 7. This piece of gear is so awesome, it could really improve the production value of my work. 8. The status quo has proved adequate for 9/10 of the work done so far. Any one of these factors could make a critical difference in making the final decision. The omission of one of these factors could tip the scale in a different way. Number 4, AGO. AGO stands for aims, goals, and objectives. Before you make a decision and choose a path, you consider how the intention stacks up against your aims and values. Your aims, goals, and objectives define who you are and constitute your life's mission. Sometimes the things that come out of us happen for no good reason, and we get lost or blown off course by the winds of adversity. Those are the times when it helps to remember our aims and see our behavior and proposed actions from that perspective. Is our contemplated action consistent with the values and actions implied by our stated aims? Number 5, FIP. FIP stands for First Important Priorities. There are many things that you may want. You may have many aims, goals, and objectives, but some may be more important than others. Doing an FIP on an idea means you juxtapose your main priorities against an idea to see if it is consistent or conflicts with it. Maybe I want to buy that piece of camera equipment, but paying for food and rent is a bigger priority than acquiring the latest and greatest gear. Number 6, dominant idea. Dominant idea. In many problems, there is an underlying dominant idea, assumption, or set of assumptions. Unless these can be identified, they will influence and/or contaminate everything that stands upon their foundation. Doing a dominant idea means trying to identify any and all of the assumptions that underlie a situation so that it or they can be challenged and avoided. A dominant idea is the box in the phrase, thinking outside the box. You can't think outside of it unless you know what it is. If you are digging a hole and not getting results, it may do no good to keep digging there. You may need to dig a hole in a different place. Number 7, define the problem. Define the problem. Sometimes the problem is affected by how it is perceived or defined. Doing a define the problem means to list different ways of describing it and asking what is the real problem. We all know how different politicians can spin the news. How can you spin your problem? Number 8, OPV. OPV stands for Other Point of View and is all about considering the thinking and feeling of other people, even if you don't agree with them or respond to them in the way they would like. This is not a new idea. The ancients used a variation of it in the famous religious phrase, "Do unto others as you would have others do unto you," which they used to reframe our egotistic and narcissistic tendency to focus only on ourselves. Number 9, APC. APC stands for Alternatives, Possibilities, Choices, and is all about finding alternative ways of thinking and feeling about something and/or doing something. There is always another way, even if we can't conceive of it at the moment. And that's the problem. We can't always get those other ways to occur to us at the moment we need to consider them. Until that happens, we don't know what we don't know. The next few tools will address this problem and help to provoke ideas when our creative well has gone dry. Number 10, stepping stone. A stepping stone is anything used as an associational bridge to move you out of the creative swamp where you are stuck. It can be a word, phrase, or sentence, an image, a thought, feeling, movement, or sensation. Anything can be used to trigger a new idea. You can make any outrageous statement to trigger another thought, which leads to another thought, which then leads to a solution. One which never may have occurred to you unless you had uttered that initial outrageous and provocative idea. Number 11, combinations. Combinations is putting two or more things together, which normally do not go together, to provoke a new associative thought or idea related to the question or problem at hand. For example, putting together meat and vegan provokes the idea of plant-based fake meat. Number 12, concept challenge. Concept challenge. This involves asking the question, why? Why must things be done this way? How else could they be done? Why do I have this view about whatever? Are there any other ways I could view this problem, this situation, or this person? What assumptions does my view rest upon? Can I challenge those assumptions? Are they really true? 13, PO, P-O, In using the last three tools with other people, it is helpful to preface the provocative thought with a tag or label to show that your statement is not an opinion or indication of insanity, but rather a creative treatment to provoke a new idea. That word is PO, which designates your usage as creative. For example, with the stepping stone tool, you might say, PO going to work is like going on vacation, even though you hate your job. That statement could be a stepping stone to many other lines of thought. It might inspire you to think about what you could do to make your job more fun. Or it could inspire you to think more about what it is that you would really love to do so that you are more fulfilled in what you do to make money. With the combinations tool, using the example previously given for that tool, you could say, meet PO vegan, to signify to the group that you are juxtaposing the two concepts for creative purposes. With concept challenge, you could preface the statement or question with the word PO, as in, PO, I need a new camera, to challenge that idea. De Bono has many other tools for thinking on his website at debono.com, in addition to training courses, books, and other resources. The key point in reviewing the small subset of their tools is to show how we can use an inherent weakness of our thinking apparatus to correct or compensate for that very same weakness. The technique is to become familiar with a repertoire of ready-made symbols that prompt us to think, feel, and act differently than we normally would, to entertain considerations that would normally not occur. In short, to take more creative and less predictable paths. It does require becoming familiar with these tools and training with them so that they can be remembered and used under pressure. Just like a martial artist practices his moves in the dojo so that they become part of muscle memory and can be accessible in a street fight, you would need to practice with these tools so you can invoke them in various settings, such as at work or in an argument with your partner, or in any situation where you are under stress and must meet a challenge. You can even invent your own tools and acronyms based on your own personality and life experience. For example, suppose you experience a life-challenging event from which you really learned a lot, and that event made a huge impression. You can memorialize what you learned in the form of an acronym and symbol to facilitate its recall in a situation where its juxtaposition would reframe a troublesome situation in an entirely new light. The event need not be life-changing. Suppose you read a chapter or paragraph in a library book or saw a video that really spoke to you in a big way. You could crystallize the lesson in an acronym or visual symbol and store it in your toolbox for later recall and application. But what form should your so-called toolbox take? Can we just rely on our memory alone? Probably not, especially under pressure. What we recommend instead is to buy a set of blank 3x5 or 4x6 index cards. On one side of each card, write the acronym and enhance or otherwise decorate it with supporting related visual content. On the back side, you could write a short note explaining what this visual symbol represents. You can carry these cards around with you in your purse, fanny pack, or backpack, or take a picture of each card with your cell phone and just look at them as needed on your photo app instead. If you are thinking about any decision, choice, challenge, or problem, and you can't remember all the tools in your thinking toolbox, whip out these cards or look at your phone to refresh your memory and apply each in turn to the situation at hand. They can help you to more thoroughly and completely process whatever question you are trying to answer or problem you are trying to solve. You need not limit your cards to be just thinking tools. Anything you want to remember that could reframe the present moment could be useful and is potentially fair game, including all the lessons we've learned in this Cognitive Reframing series of videos. See links to all these videos in the description. As we learned in the previous video, our memories are not very reliable. What good does it do to have a big experience or hear an inspiring quotation if we can't remember to apply it later? Constructing your own personal card deck will help you do just that. Here are a few examples. In the very first reframing video, we learned about Carlos Castaneda's concept of using death as an advisor, which juxtaposes the idea of our impending demise against whatever petty concerns are upsetting us at that moment. Although not a thinking tool per se, death as an advisor is a great tool to adjust our perspective, especially when we lose it and can't see the forest for the trees. Since perspective is foundational for thinking, as thinking rests upon it, death as an advisor is an indirect thinking tool in that it challenges our perspective and could be said to be a specific instance of De Bono thinking tool number 12, concept challenge. It challenges the trivia and appropriateness of our thoughts, feelings, and behavior in light of the reality that we could die unexpectedly at any moment. It is also an instance of De Bono thinking tool number 3, CAF, consider all factors, in that it is an often overlooked factor that could be used to process any situation. Use your imagination to design a simple graphic to help you remember to try on this perspective when your current perspective is out of balance. Here are several examples of a death as an advisor card that anyone could design. Another example of memorializing an important life lesson is what we learned in the second video of our Cognitive Reframing series about gratitude. Because we are genetically primed to see the negative as a consequence of the evolutionary struggle for survival, the gratitude reframe helps us to balance our perspective, which is the basis for our thoughts and feelings. When you are feeling sorry for yourself and playing the "woe is me" song in your head, this reframe, especially when used in conjunction with some of the other tools, is like invoking a magic spell to change your inner state. Here are a few examples of what such a card might look like. Deal yourself some wisdom when you need it by making up your own deck of cards. Look at them whenever you have a problem, question, choice, or decision, especially if relevant information is in short supply. They can be a huge asset to overcoming the thinking errors that flow from our primate evolutionary history. For more advanced training and practice in thinking, visit debono.com.